Welcome. In this video, I am going to discuss public policy in terms of economism. So, we will start with the introduction to economism. What does it mean? How can we define it? The term economism has been used to refer to the institutionalization and normalization of economic logic in public policy making. It has been adopted as a term partly because it helps to distinguish the political power of economic ideas from the academic discipline of economics. This is important in highlighting that the economic logic that is in the ascendant is not necessarily representative of contemporary economic theory. Indeed, the economic logic that is embedded in policy making is the outcome of an explicitly political process. As Peck argues with respect to economic necessity arguments in globalization, contrary to the impression fostered by some globalization ideologies, these developments are not naturally occurring inevitable consequences of the way the world works. Instead, they are part of a sustained political project which is explicitly concerned to normalize and naturalize conditions such as free trade, flexible labor, public sector austerity measures, and low inflation. This presentation aims to show how basic economic understandings and concepts act as a foundation for policy analysis. Within this exposition, we probe the extent to which there is a single or unique economic logic to be institutionally embedded and argue that within the straightforward entry-level concepts of new classical economics which are embedded in policy discourses, there are, in fact, many different policy choices that might be recommended. That particular economic ideas have been influential to the extent of becoming normalized is a function of politics, not inevitable or irresistible changes in the global political economy. The term economism has the advantage of distinguishing the political power of economic ideas from economic itself and helps mollify protesters from within the economics profession who may complain the unsophisticated and elementary analysis being used for political purposes in a way that doesn't always reflect what economists actually think. This presentation uses three main concepts from economics in the service of the ambition to illuminate economism and public policy. The first section looks at the concept of market failure and the policy prescriptions that allow from its recognition. The second section will introduce the theory of public goods and discusses how this economic rationale was used to justify the construction of the welfare state. The third section probes the textbook notion of government failures as the logic behind many public policy reforms over the last 20 years. So we start with the market failure. Most economists use the achievement of Pareto efficiency as their goal in public policy design. According to this standard, a situation is efficient only if no individuals can be made better off without making someone else worse off. Better off and worse off are understood in terms of the welfare of individuals as opposed to groups, communities, or societies. In these terms, Pareto efficiency refers to a situation, conception, to a utilitarian conception of what is valuable. It is often defined as the summation of the welfare of all individuals in the society. Welfare can be measured either cardinally in terms of a common currency or measured ordinally in terms of relative utility. More important for understanding microeconomic analysis, it can be shown that under certain idealized conditions, a system of free markets will lead to a Pareto efficient situation. This is known as the first welfare theorem and was the first that was demonstrated mathematically by Kenneth Arrow and Debro. Although equally important for assessing economic logic is that the result depends on several restrictive assumptions in the proof. For example, markets exist for all possible goods, markets are perfectly competitive, and transaction costs are negligible. Although most microeconomics textbooks are predisposed to favor markets as efficient methods of allocating resources, this disposition is always accompanied by recognition of market failure. Indeed, beyond most introductory undergraduate classes, this is the starting point for economic analysis of public policy. Market failure is a broader concept for a variety of critiques of markets. In economics terms, it refers to a series of factors that may result in pure market solutions failing to be efficient. This is an important point for appreciating the role of certain economic thinking in policy making. The efficiency advantages of the markets are contingent upon certain key assumptions. We set out the main ones below under separate headings and suggest that they may all be doubted. These doubts provide the economic logic behind many public policies. Governments should intervene to correct market failures in the economy. More detail on any of these market failure is available in most public economic textbooks. Before proceeding, it is worth noting that the notion of market failure contains the implicit assumption that markets take primacy over other forms of economic organization. Government intervention is secondary and only justified in terms of the extent to which it corrects market failure, that is, the extent to which it can help markets work and function. Further, there is nothing in the concept of market failures to answer the following questions. How bad do the violations of the conditions necessary for Pareto efficiency have to be before an alternative means of delivery would be an improvement? That is, what point is it efficient? At what point is it efficient for government to stop correcting the market failure and consider some other non-market allocative means? This is an important gap in microeconomics and means that economics will tend to frame policy analysis as the correction of market failure rather than a positive endorsement of something else. We'll also discuss externalities. We have already discussed these in my classes and in other lectures. The result that market deliver Pareto efficient outcomes assumes that the social cost and benefit of an activity is the aggregation of individual or private cost and benefit for that particular activity. However, in fact, it is not the same. So, the social cost of producing motor cars is the sum of the cost to each firm producing motor cars in the economy. An externality is any situation where this doesn't hold, where the sum of the private costs diverge from the true social costs and are the social benefit from the production and consumption of a good is greater than the sum of the private benefits. This occurs when the actions of one individual affect others, but where that individual doesn't bear the true costs nor reap the rewards of their actions upon others. Pollution emitted by a factory that spoils the surrounding environment and affects the health of the nearby residents is an example of a negative externality. Another common example is people deciding to use motor vehicles at certain peak times, leading to traffic congestion. An example of a positive externality is the effects of well-educated labor force on the productivity of a company are perhaps more previously the decision to use deodorant on public transport. Market prices can only reflect the actions of individual consumers and firms, and these agents only act on the basis of private costs and benefits. This means that market prices, consumption and production decisions will be on the basis of private costs and benefits. Market outcomes will thus be inefficient as too much of an activity will occur which has a negative externality, that is, firms underestimate the full social cost of their actions as in pollution creating production, and too little of any activity which has a positive externality, as in the case where individuals do not account for the total social benefits of acquiring education. The second thing is that of failure of competition. The first welfare theorem requires competition in order for the invisible hand of price mechanism to allocate goods and services efficiently. For this to be the case, there must be no monopoly, oligopoly, or monopsony in any product, factor, and capital markets. In addition, firms are price takers. No firm controls a sufficient large enough share of the market to directly influence market prices. There are a number of good reasons why competition tends to fail against this standard. For example, barriers to entry for potential firms may exist if there are increasing returns to scale in production. Then already established large firms can always produce more cheaply than a new entrants. This is why there are so few mass production car companies in the world. Alternatively, the barrier to entry may be the result of control of some of technological standard, as was the case of Microsoft and the Windows operating system prior to the legal ruling that company was acting anti-competitively in the USA. Further, transportation costs may limit competition, which may result in spatial monopoly. In terms of market failure, lack of competition can lead to less of the good or service being supplied and at higher price than the Pareto efficient level. We take the third case of market failures when there are public goods. Public goods are the goods which it costs little or nothing for an individual to enjoy the benefits of, and yet it is very costly to exclude any individual from using the good. So it has two characteristics, that is non-rivalry in consumption and non-excludability. A market will provide too little or nothing at all of a public good. A potential supplier will face full cost of production, but user cannot easily be charged or have no incentive to pay, the so-called free rider problem. The classic example of a nearly pure public good is a national defense. You cannot defend the vulnerable border regions of a country from foreign threats without also simultaneously defending everyone else that lives within the border. Example would be Kashmiris living near to the Indian boundary. So when the national defense is provided by the government of Pakistan, it is not only for these people living vulnerably near to the Indian border, but also for the rest of the Pakistanis living away from the border. The inability of potential providers to exclude people who refuse to pay from nevertheless consuming and benefiting from an expensive public good usually means that very many of the consumers of the good will act as free riders and choose not to help pay for its provision. As a consequence, private production of the good or service may prove unprofitable, as the good or service thus may not be provided at all by the free market, even though everyone would be better off without some positive level of production of the good in question. Then there are certain other characteristics or information failures which leads to market failures. For goods that are infrequently purchased are required prior experience or knowledge to enjoy the benefits of, or which have a complex set of characteristics consumers may be ignorant in some degree. So that means when there is information asymmetry, that also leads to market failure. This means that the price at which they are willing to buy or the amount they wish to buy may not represent a correct estimation of the benefit to them. Used cars are classical example of such information failures. In such cases, the price in the market will not necessarily achieve Pareto efficiency in the production and consumption for a given initial income distribution. The more general point is that individuals may not be in a position to make rational choices. The rational actor, Homo economicus, is axiomatic for models in new classical economics. Most other social sciences start from the position that individual agents do not have a clear, fixed, and consistent set of preferences that they attempt to maximize the satisfaction of. Neither can agents be assumed to have a correct model of the world that predicts accurately the link between actions and consequences. However, for economics, the concern is that of once individuals and firms are seen as non-rational, bounded rational and irrational, the result that markets will deliver Pareto optimality cannot be assumed to hold. Another cause of market failures is that of immobility and time lags. The first welfare theory requires the whole economy to be in equilibrium simultaneously rather than just any single market. Yet, in the models as well as in practice, a single change in demand in one market can send a ripple through the economy via a set of interdependent markets. There is no economic theory to suggest how prices readjust to equilibrium, nor how quickly. It is assumed that prices will readjust to ensure that each market is in equilibrium. But consider the transmission from product to factor markets in the case of dental services. An increase in the demand for dental services increases the demand for dentists' time, which can only be satisfied to a limited extent by the existing number of trained dentists through overtime or reduction in holidays. This will lead to an increase in the wage rate for dentists that will encourage more people to train as dentists or perhaps some migration. However, the dental profession requires 4 years of training prior to being an approved dental practitioner. Further, the reasons of family, friends, housing costs, and government regulation, dentists may not respond to changes in relative wage rates interregionally or internationally. The factor of production is immobile to some degree. Thus, increases demand for certain services may take several years to ripple through the economy and arrive at an efficient equilibrium again. It is relatively easy to imagine these sorts of cases for many sectors in the economy, and thus immobility and time lags become an important aspect of market failures. Incomplete markets is another key characteristic of market failures. A complete market economy would provide all goods and services for which the cost of provision is less than the benefits derived by potential consumers. Where markets are not complete, the result that markets lead to Pareto efficiency will not necessarily hold. Markets may be missing and incomplete due to lack of information or asymmetries in information between potential buyers and sellers. This is sometimes expressed in terms of principal agent problem. The market for insurance is a good example. An insurance firm may not offer insurance to low risk customers that would be willing to pay more for the insurance than it costs to provide it because it cannot recognize low risk agents or because it fears offering insurance to bad risk agents. This is a problem of adverse selection. The principal cannot observe the type of agents. There exists a market exchange between buyer and seller that would improve Pareto efficiency that does not occur because of poor information. There is also the problem of moral hazard, where the principal may not be able to observe the behavior of agents. In insurance terms, a firm may not insure individuals because it cannot observe how they will behave post insurance contract. That is, will they start acting differently because they are insured? The problem of moral hazard is frequently raised in terms of health policy, where arguments are made that health insurance can promote demand for lifestyle health care services, such as cosmetic surgery, which drains resources from cases of genuine medical need. This concern may lead to a less than efficient number of insurance contracts as companies raise prices to cover the risk of extra claims, which reduces demand for insurance and potentially leads to missing markets for certain forms of insurance. Different governments, in justifying different public policies, have variously used the six market failures described above. There is no determinate logic from the identification of a market failure through to a particular public policy prescription. One of our aims in this lecture is to show that not all economic concepts lead to inexorably to new liberal policy prescriptions, and indeed much economic analysis through predisposed to certain broad types of solutions is not quite as determinate or relentless as is sometimes assumed. The next section focuses in some details on the theory of public goods because number one, it is a clear example of how the notion of market failure can be used to support a whole set of policy proposals, and number two, in particular case, market failure logic has been used to justify an extensive welfare state. So, public goods and policy solutions. The simple version of the theory of public goods noted above suggested a significant social problem for market allocation methods. Nevertheless, various social arrangements and institutions have evolved to encourage the provision of public goods. For example, the non-profit or third sector of the economy devotes considerable efforts to the provision of public goods financed by voluntary contributions that are motivated by appeals to duty or conscience. Alternatively, voluntary contributions may also be gathered from those people most intensely and deeply concerned about the particular social need being addressed, or from those who may be less beneficent but can be shamed into it by informal social pressures that withdraw status and respect from people identified and stigmatized as free riders. In addition to these non-profit approaches, the provision of impure public goods may often be handled through ordinary market forces. These are goods that have one or other property, non-rivalry or non-excludability to some degree. A frequent discussed example in economic textbooks is fire protection and feasibility of fee-based private provision. For Stiglitz, fire protection is similar to a pure public good in that the marginal cost of covering an additional person is very low, as most of the time firefighters are not engaged in fighting fires but are waiting for calls. Protecting an additional individual has little extra cost. However, the ease of exclusion for fire protection is similar to that of a pure private good. Indeed, in many rural and remote areas around the world, fire protection is by voluntary subscriptions. However, in urban areas, buildings without fire protection may benefit from their proximity to buildings which are insured. That is, for the fire service to protect insured buildings requires them to put out fires in uninsured buildings because of the risks they may pose. This situation is more difficult to solve in a private market. It should also be noted that at least a partial provision of public goods often occurs when there is a single organization who feel they will benefit from the particular public good to such an unusually large degree that it is worthwhile for them to go ahead and just pay for the whole thing while ignoring the many other small thing or small time free riders as irrelevant. Thus, mining companies in remote areas of Australia have invested heavily in infrastructure for their immediate commercial purposes, but the road, rail, and port developments have benefited other economic activities as well. Nevertheless, the classic solution to the problem of under-provision of public goods have been government funding through compulsory taxation and government production of the goods and services in question. Although this may substantially alleviate the problem of numerous free riders that refuse to pay for the benefits they receive, it should be noted that the policy process does not provide any very plausible method for determining what the optimal or best level of provision of a public good actually is. Another line of economics argument is that where there are problems with the market mechanisms, these are not really from the market failure at all, but rather the absence of clearly specified and enforceable private property rights. For example, the broadcasting of television programs used to be seen as a public good. Public televisions like the British Broadcasting Corporation, that is BBC, transmit to the whole of the UK so that no one can be prevented from tuning in, nor does any extra person doing so reduce the amount of viewing available for subsequent viewers. However, this form of broadcasting was adopted not because of anything intrinsic to the market of television broadcasting, but because, with funding from license fee, there was no need for exclusion. Public goods and policy solutions. While the theory of public goods can support government intervention, it doesn't exclusively do so. Indeed, the problem of public goods admits many different types of solutions. Thus, although notions of economic necessity, economic logic, or market rule are properly represented in the political economy literature as part of political ideology, it is proper to note in this pre-station economism that the economics discipline itself would not recognize such definitive, immutable, and deterministic logic. The subject allows very different views on the balance between state and market provision and the efficient design of public policy. In addition to market failure, there is also government failure. Some economists believe that even with the good intentions, governments seldom get their policy applications correct. They can tax, control, and regulate, but the eventual outcome will be a deepening of the market failure, or even worse, a new failure may arise. Market failures may provide a rationale for public policy intervention, but there are good reasons to believe that public policy intervention will actually reduce efficiency relative to the status quo, that is, no intervention level. Those reasons usually come under the broad heading of government failures. Public choice has been concerned with the application of economic reasoning to the study of politics, using in particular idea of homo economicus, or the rational agent, to explain the behavior in the public sector and the extent of the problem of government failure in the delivery of services in line with citizens' preferences. Public choice is a theoretical perspective. Public choice as a theoretical perspective has been closely associated with the gamut of institutional reform and public sector restructuring under the broad rubric of the new public management. In economics, an incentive is any form that provides a motive for a particular course of action or counts as a reason for preferring one choice to the alternatives. Public choice theory is essentially about different incentive structures faced by the public sector implies compared to private sector counterparts within the guiding postulate of instrumental rationality. The absence of competition in the provision of government goods and services has the same deleterious effects on efficiency as it does in the market failure story. For public choice theory, the key point is that the absence of competition is norm rather than the exception in the public sector. Indeed, just as new classical economics analyzes the deadweight welfare losses of monopoly, so monopolies in public services markets are equally efficiency reducing as bureaucrats have little incentive to keep costs down or introduce innovations in service delivery. Compounding the lack of competition are the lack of threat of bankruptcy, and the ability to secure government subsidies, which mean that public sector organizations do not have the incentive to respond to changes in the preferences of citizens, where private sector organizers are bound to respond to shifting preferences as expressed in charges in relative prices. Monopolies need not necessarily have adverse consequences as long as the behavior of bureaucrats can be easily monitored and controlled. However, for public choice theory, there are no unambiguous indicators of performance in the public sector. A key component of public choice approach is that only public officials know the true cost of delivering the government good or service that is desired by the political sponsor. It is therefore easy for bureaucrats to persuade politicians to allocate more money than is necessary for a particular task. This is the standard principal agent problem of asymmetric information. However, the possibility of solving this with a well-designed contract is lower in the public sector than the private sector for several reasons. In terms of economic theory of optimal contract design, the starting point is that any measure of performance that reveals information about the effort level chosen by the agent should be included in the compensation contract. In the public sector, due to the complex nature of its activities and the multiplicity of objectives that public policy often seeks to achieve, there is rarely a measure that provides feedback on the performance of an individual agent. This problem exists for relative performance evaluation as well, measurement relative to other similar agents so as to filter out some common background noise. Indeed, extent measures of public sector performance tend to be at the team or organizational level. It is impossible to ascribe the output of hospitals, for example, to any particular agent. These are complex production processes that do not resemble Fordist production lines. There is a, a presumption in public choice theory that the problem of coordination and control grows disproportionately with organizational size. For public choice analysis, the public sector is characterized by large, inflexible bureaucracies that are capable of producing significant quantities of outputs, often at impressive speed, but lack the deftness to respond to changing circumstances or shifts in citizen preferences. The standard Weberian bureaucracy that pervades most public sector organizations misaligns the incentives facing public sector employees toward rule following in the mass production of standard goods and services rather than the tailored delivery of public services to satisfy citizens' preferences. The term economism has been used here to refer to the institutionalization and normalization of economic logic in public policy making. It has been adopted as a term here partly because it helps to distinguish the political power of economic ideas from the academic discipline of economics. We have tried to show that many of the influential economic ideas are introductory, ideal type, textbook heuristics. They are often held by assumptions without reference to more sophisticated economic theory or detailed empirical work. The journey from economic textbook to political project is one in which the ideas themselves are changed, molded, or interpreted for specific purposes. Additionally, similar economic ideas have been used at different times to support very different policy prescriptions. For example, the welfare state, that intellectual basis in inter alia, a theory of public goods, just as the NPM reforms in many OECD countries since the 1980s have justified in terms of and drawn from public policy choice. Thanks much for watching this video. Kindly subscribe to the channel and